All right, the Articles of Confederation, March 1st, 1781. So the states, they didn't act immediately to actually accept the Articles of Confederation. It actually takes until February 1779 for 12 of the 13 states to approve the document. Maryland is going to hold out ratifying or adopting the Articles of Confederation until March 1781 after it settled on a land argument with Virginia. Why this is important is because it was pretty clear that the 13 individual states, which were essentially 13 separate countries, weren't really in any sort of rush to form any sort of centralized or federal government, national government. So the central government that they do adopt is, by design, extremely weak. Um, the Articles did establish what we think of as the United States of America, being a perpetual union that's formed to defend the states collectively, but it provided really very few central powers beyond what is established like as a Congress. So it doesn't have any executive at all, and it has no judicial branch whatsoever. So the Articles Congress, that's what it's called, it only had one chamber, and each state had just one vote. Now you could have multiple representatives from the state, but the state collectively only received one vote. So this reinforced the power of the states to operate independently from the central government, even when that wasn't in the nation's best interest. If you think about this, like from a historical context, the United States owes a lot of money to France. It owes money to Spain. It has Native Americans on its western border, its southern border, and it also has Great Britain to still deal with. So these early days of the Republic are, well, it's not a republic yet, of the Confederation, are pretty tenuous, actually. So if you were going to make any laws in the Congress, you needed 9 of the 13 states to pass those laws. And it would require a supermajority, making it really difficult to pass any legislation that would affect all 13 states. And if you know anything about the states, you know that they are essentially 3 different regions. You've got the New England states, the central states, and then the southern states. And they have different requirements. They have different outlooks. They have different experiences from the war and then coming out of it. So 9 out of 13 is not an easy hurdle to actually accomplish to get laws passed. And then the articles themselves are almost impossible to amend. The articles require unanimous consent, meaning all 13 states would have to agree to any changes that are going to be made. And that never happens. So given the rivalries between the states, the rule, it really makes the articles an untenable form of government. Okay? So Congress is unable to collect taxes. They can pass, if you can get 9 states to agree to a tax, that's great, but they don't really have any mechanism in order to actually collect that tax. So essentially, being a confederation, they relied on voluntary efforts of the states to actually send in the tax money to the central government. So some states might comply, some states might comply later, and other states might never send in any of the taxes. So without the ability to fund itself, the central government can't really maintain any sort of effective military or even have its own paper currency. So in essence, the reality is for several years, the Confederacy that is the United States at the time, it has no real military presence, and it has no real navy either to protect the country from invasion or harassment. The states could, and they did, conduct their own foreign policy. So technically, that role is supposed to fall to the central government, and it did in one sense, and that was when Great Britain recognizes the independence of the 13 colonies, a central government representing these United States goes over to Ghent, and then they sign the peace treaty. Okay, but now it's after the war has happened and the states are independent, and essentially what you have is each state able to dictate what its interactions are going to be with foreign powers, and that could mean that states like Massachusetts, which were closer to Canada, could be talking to the British government, where a state like Georgia could be causing trouble with the Spanish crown. perhaps leading to disputes between the new United States and then the Spanish government. So this is not a good thing. You need a unified voice, not disparate people or disparate governments interacting with a multitude of different foreign powers. States had their own money systems in place. There wasn't a common currency in the Confederation at all. So the central government and the states, they each had separate money, which made trade between the states and other countries extremely difficult. Clearly, paper money wasn't the ideal. People would use like gold and silver, but like paper money does exist. It is backed by gold and silver, but I mean, it would be confusing, right? If you're somebody from Georgia and you're trying to sell your product in Massachusetts, do you accept paper script from Massachusetts, or do you require instead gold or silver? Same thing, like the United States owes money to France and Spain, right? Do they accept our paper money, or do they take gold and silver? Clearly, they're going to take gold and silver. But the idea and the point here is that there's no uniform economic policy going on. The central government couldn't settle war debts, so there is a capital. Well, ideally, there's a capital. And this central government, which is seated there, is unable to pay its war debts. And they owe a lot of money to European countries, specifically France and Spain. And if you can't pay, I mean, that's a reason for those countries to come over to the United States and, possibly invade or seize property. And if you know your U.S. history, you should know that there was essentially a naval war that was occurring between the United States and France that involved impressment of U.S. sailors and what Americans viewed as the theft of their goods on the high seas, where the French viewed it as like, you owe us money, you're not paying, this is how we're going to get it back. So this is a big deal. The central government lacking the ability to tax, having no power to make trade between the states and other countries. The United States economy is messed up from 1787. Okay, at the same time, I already read that. You already made that point. Okay, Shays Rebellion. So this is really the final nail in the coffin of the Confederate States of America. So, or the American Confederacy. A tax protest by Western Massachusetts farmers occurs in 1786 and 1787. So Massachusetts was one of the states that was really affected by the American Revolution. There was a lot of damage. Remember, if you know anything about American history, you've got the Boston Massacre. It's a lot of things that lead up to the war and the eventual Declaration of Independence are based in the northern states, specifically places like Massachusetts. So Massachusetts state is rebuilding, and how they are paying for that rebuilding is they are taxing their farmers. And these farmers can't pay those taxes, and as a result, those farms are being foreclosed on or seized by the state. So these men who are farmers who had fought in the Revolution, they grab their guns and they march on the first courthouses and then the state capitol. This will lead to the state of Massachusetts calling out to the central government, help, we need help, and there's no reply. Okay, so the state of Massachusetts had to rely on its own militia to actually put down this rebellion, and it was the city of Boston, specifically private Boston businesses, that paid for this militia to be sponsored and put this down. That is not a way to run a country. Plus, this means that property rights are not really secure under this form of government. So these events, the Shays Rebellion, and pretty much all of these things that were happening, these were alarming to the founders like Washington, Madison, Hamilton, to the point where delegates from 5 states, they met at Annapolis, Maryland in September 1786. And what they were there to discuss was, changing the Articles of Confederation to make it able to do things like provide order and protect property rights. So this group included Madison and Hamilton, and they ended up recommending that there be a meeting between all 13 states the following May in Philadelphia. So the Confederate Congress, they agree to this, and the Constitutional Convention of 1787 effectively ended the era of the Articles of Confederation. Now, while overall the Articles of Confederation is not the best form of government, it did come up with like how do you settle this area right here, which is called the Northwest Territory. And so they came up with the Land Ordinance of 1785. And what they did is they took this territory, they divided it into nice orderly grids, and they put these into townships and counties. And then that land was sold. And I mean, you can see it right here. Okay, if you need help with this, if you've ever flown over the nation, you can see it from the air. This grid system. And if you've ever been to a place like Boston or Philadelphia or pretty much anywhere on the East Coast to the older cities, you can see the meandering cities, and it's pretty clear that the older parts of the town don't really have any plan. All right, the second thing that the articles, or not the articles, but the government of the Articles of the Confederation rather, did is they passed what's called the Northwest Ordinance. And what this did is it explained how do new states get added to the Union, and it divided the nation between free and enslaved along this river right here, the Ohio. And this establishes what will be a problem all the way till 1865. So that's the Articles of Confederation. Thank you.